joining us right now on the Comcast Business Hotline, does a tremendous job covering the Eagles for the Inquirer. And speaking of the Inquirer, experience the new look of Inquirer Sports, where fans can read, watch, and listen to their favorite reporters and columnists. Go to Inquirer.com/sports. Mr. E.J. Smith on the Comcast Business Hotline. How you doing today, E.J.?
I'm doing well, Tyron. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for coming on. First thing, what are your impressions of Kevin Patullo getting the offensive coordinator job when you also consider the timing of it in the season and when in the process the Eagles were looking to make this hire?
Yeah, I think that's important context to point out is that they got to this late in the game. You know, that's the nature of having a deep postseason run. When you lose one of your coordinators, you know, we saw them deal with it 2 years ago as well, obviously with Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon. So I do think that's important to keep in mind, but at the same time, like they were methodical at certain points, you know, looking for coordinator replacements 2 years ago. And I think that it's hard to – I mean, I gave them credit at the time for having an extensive search, especially on defense. You know, they brought in a lot of different minds, you know, 2 years ago, and I thought that was a good process, you know, to bring in, you know, guys like you know, they just brought in a lot of different guys from different backgrounds, you know, some college coaches, some experienced NFL guys before, you know, ultimately deciding on Sean Desai. So, you know, I think that was actually a good process. Maybe the result wasn't great, but I think having, you know, you'll hear these guys talk about like marketplace of ideas. I think bringing in a lot of different people and hearing different ideas on what certain coaches might do with your offense and with the talent that you have, I think that would have been a good way to go. But I do understand that, you know, because they got to it so late in the game, because they had Kevin Patullo, I think they really had him lined up as, you know, the kind of the next guy to step in. I think when they hired Kellen Moore, they knew that there was a chance that he would end up getting poached for a head coaching job. So I think that kind of speaks to why this went the way that it did in terms of how quickly they kind of, you know, settled on Patullo, and also like how it wasn't necessarily as much of an extensive search for an offensive coordinator.
All right, so they bring in a new offensive coordinator. Isn't the question going to be, is Nick Sirianni going to step on toes to call plays in the offense this upcoming year?
You know, I feel like him and Kevin have a relationship where that I wouldn't worry as much about that. You know, I think that they've known each other a long time, and I imagine that they probably have a relationship where they probably respect each other's boundaries more than, you know, maybe somebody who is new. That, you know, I think that the fact that they have an inherent trust is probably why I wouldn't necessarily worry so much about that. You know, to me, the big thing with Kellen Moore is that, like, you know, my colleague Jeff McClain reported this, that the terminology will stay more or less the same. And I think that, you know, is probably an indication that this is still going to be an offense with some of Kellen Moore's, you know, fingerprints on it, and some of Nick Sirianni's and some of Kevin Patullo's fingerprints. But I think the important thing is really about Jalen Hurts and the fact that, like, the verbiage won't be changing drastically. I think that is a real drain on a quarterback to have to learn different terminology each offseason. I think that the fact that they were able to avoid that is actually probably one of the more important things about the hire.
Interesting, EJ. Now, you mentioned Jalen Hurts, and that we played the soundbite a lot yesterday when the news came down, where Hurts, in our opinion, gave a Jalen Hurts answer. Some people, when asked about Patullo, while others thought that it was more than that, maybe he was saying that he didn't have confidence in him. How do you think Hurts and him will get along, at least initially?
Yeah, you know, my read on the Hurts answer is he typically has strange answers when it comes to things that I think he doesn't view really, at least publicly, he will express that it's not really his decision. You know, I remember going back to last offseason, you know, the start of last offseason, when he was talking about Nick Sirianni's job status. I think you could tell he was a little uncomfortable talking about that, at least, you know, publicly on camera, about, you know, kind of having to address those things. So I think that was my read on it more than anything else. I mean, it definitely wasn't a ringing endorsement of, you know, Kevin Patullo as a play caller. He kind of said that they just don't know what to expect from him as a play caller because he hasn't done it. But in terms of their relationship, I think the fact that they have an existing relationship is important. You know, I think, again, like I mentioned, the terminology side of things, I think the fact that they have a familiarity with what they want to accomplish offensively, and they've been in the room together for several years, I think that is a good starting point. And I think from here, it's really just a matter of figuring out as a play caller, you know, how to get in sync with what Jalen wants, and, you know, kind of being able to you know, have a shared vision. You hear those guys talk about that a lot of the time. I think that the fact that they've got a relationship and they've worked together as long as they have, I think it should give them a good starting point. But now that Kevin Patullo is the one making those decisions in the game, I think it's important that they kind of figure that out together.
All right, that's the offense. Let's think about defense a little bit in a sense that who do you think is the number one guy that Howie needs to re-sign here?
Yeah, I've really struggled with this. I'm going to be honest with you, because just covering this team as long as I have and knowing their philosophies and honestly seeing how, their positional philosophies, the positions that they value, the ones that they don't, seeing how it's led to success for this organization, it's hard to argue against somebody like Milton Williams. But I actually would in this instance. I think that when you look at what Milton Williams is going to probably get paid on the open market, the market that he's going to demand, by comparison, you look at Zach Bond and how important he has been for the Eagles' defense. I actually think that Zach Bond might just ever so slightly be the priority, in my opinion, at the very least. I wrote about this earlier this week. I think that Bond comes back probably a little bit cheaper than Milton Williams. And I think that his role in this defense is so unique and so important. It's hard to envision what this Eagles defense looks like without Zach Bond. So I think that he just ever so slightly edges out Milton Williams, but that's not to say that that's not an important spot. And if they lose Milton Williams, they're going to have to backfill that position. I know they have a lot of good depth already. They got Jordan Davis, obviously. They've got Moro Ajama. They have some good options. Even Thomas Booker, I think, is a good option, as far as a depth defensive tackle. But, we learned this with Fletcher Cox, throughout his Eagles career, where we saw it with Jalen Carter, that a great defensive tackle is usually only as good as his running mate. Because, if an offensive line can just slide protection toward, the star defensive tackle and double team him all game, you have to be able to make teams pay for that, as a defensive tackle rotation. So they're both really important players, and they're both really important positions in a Vic Fangio scheme. I think that Bond can come back a little bit cheaper than Williams, which is why I probably would lean ever so slightly toward Bond. But honestly, it's one of those two guys for me.
We're speaking with E.J. Smith. He does a tremendous job covering the Eagles for the Inquirer. And that brings us to the Combine, which guys will be there 1 week from today. It's sneaking up on us down out in Indianapolis. Obviously, it's way too soon to focus on players. What positions, maybe, if we're going to be watching the workouts and guys run and do all these things, what are some positions maybe we should key on next week? Because Howie just hit a home run in the draft. If he was to hit another one, this team would probably be set up for maybe they would be ready for a dynasty if he has a draft this year like he had last year.
Yeah, no, I've been brushing up on players all week. I feel like the defensive tackle and defensive end groups are really deep in this year's draft. So I think that that's where we're going to have to start. I think that there's a cluster of edge rushers that I think are really going to start to separate themselves in the next couple of weeks and months. There's a lot of different, it's kind of take your pick. There's different styles. There's big guys, there's smaller guys who are, quick around the edge. There's guys who are kind of a blend of both. So I really do. I think that edge rusher is really good, and defensive tackle stands out even more, honestly. There are just so many guys. There's a guy, there's guys from big schools, guys from small schools. There's just a real variety at that position and a real depth. I think, when you look at that defensive tackle rotation, we were just talking about how important it is for the Eagles, to figure that position out if they do lose Milton Williams. I think they'll have options in the draft. That's another reason why I kind of lean towards Zach Bond, is because there are so many guys there. So, I think seeing how these guys kind of separate themselves in the next couple of weeks is going to be important, because when you're looking at it right now, you see some players that get mocked to the Eagles and in mock drafts. You see some guys that, people would like to see them end up with the Eagles. And I think some of these guys might end up being top 15 picks, just because there is going to be so much movement, at the top of those position groups, because there really are. There are a lot of guys. Some of the guys that end up in the second and third round are probably first-round talents in most years' draft classes, but there's just so many of them that I imagine they'll probably get pushed lower to the board, which obviously falls in the Eagles' favor, since they're going to be picking in the the last part of the round. So.
When you're going over all this, what do you just envision what the defense should look like next year? Maybe moving Cooper DeJean over to play where Slay was, and then you have it open on the nickel. And do you just kind of play chess with this and then move it around and say, all right, here's our openings?
Yeah, I think you could move Cooper DeJean to the outside. I think he's good enough to play there. But honestly, I think what makes him so special is his versatility and the fact that he is so good out of that nickel spot. I'll be honest with you, I probably am higher on Keely Ringo than most. I think that he is, a decent option. Maybe that you don't want to go into next season with him, written in pen, that he's the guy, at that outside cornerback spot opposite Quinyon Mitchell. But to me, I think that Kelee Ringo has shown enough upside. He's still younger than Quinyon Mitchell too. I think people forget that. I think that he could be an option there. So I think that they should probably backfill an outside cornerback if Darius Slay isn't back. But yeah, I think that you also have that option to put Cooper DeJean out there. I mean, Vic Fangio talked a lot last summer about having the best three guys out there. And, Quinyon Mitchell was in the slot for parts of last summer because, there was the thought that maybe the best three included Quinyon out of the slot. So, I think that Vic Fangio is not going to be afraid to move those guys around, to your point. I think that there is a chance that it looks a lot different than maybe we envision. But I feel like Kelee Ringo is the one that I don't want to discount him because I think he's got the physical traits to be, a starting corner in the NFL. I think he just needs the experience and the reps to kind of figure that part out.
Well, EJ, we really appreciate the time. Have you heard anything? It's real early about the Kobe Dean's injury, because we're thinking about linebacker Ricky and I. Is there we hear that this injury is iffy and maybe he wouldn't be ready for week 1?
Yeah, I mean, I know that the patella tendon injuries are usually longer recovery timelines, sometimes even than ACL. So I think it is going to be a long-term injury. We asked him about it in locker room cleanout a couple weeks ago about what the timeline would be, and he didn't really want to get into too many specifics. So I mean, listen, he's been through rehab processes before. I'm sure that he's going to be pretty efficient with the whole process. But yeah, those injuries are typically pretty complicated. So I don't know about week 1. I haven't really thought that far into the future yet, if I'm being honest with you. But I do feel like this one's going to probably linger a little bit longer.
All right, well, we really appreciate the time and all the great work you do. And will you be traveling to Indianapolis?
I'm not going to be in Indianapolis. I'll be at the league meetings, though.
Okay. Well, best of luck. Safe travels, because this thing ran right into no rest for you.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon, man.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right. That was E.J. Smith on the Comcast Business Hotline. Does a great job covering the Eagles for the Inquirer. Go to inquirer.com/sports. He's a real filmsman as well.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching our YouTube. If you want to help us out, go ahead and like and subscribe for us. If you liked what you saw, go right over here to our playlists and pick out whatever you want to watch.